Hi, I'm Shalane from TSC Tuition, and today I'll be looking at a Rear Window essay. Today's essay comes courtesy of ATAR Notes, so I will put a link in the description box below and you can click on that and maybe read along with me as I go through just the introduction and body paragraph 1. So the prompt is, Hitchcock leaves the audience feeling that Jeff's actions have been vindicated. Do you agree? Given that it's a prompt asking about Jeff's actions, I think we have to talk a little bit about voyeurism, so I'm expecting that in the essay, in the body paragraphs, and I expect there to be some sort of discussion about whether or not his actions are morally justified. So it could go either way. The student could argue that it's not justified, or that it is justified, or somewhere in the middle. So let's have a look. So let's just read this out. Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 crime film Rear Window delineates that pervasive mood of suspicion while exploring consequences of voyeurism during the McCarthy era. Hitchcock leaves spectators with a conclusion that his protagonist, L.B. Jeffrey's activity has only been somewhat vindicated, but to a larger extent highlight the price of his actions, indicating his actions mostly could not be validated. Okay, so straight away we're really getting to the contention already. But what I'm not seeing a lot of is any kind of hint as to what kind of validation this student is talking about. It's only the introduction, so it could come later on, but what I'm not seeing is more of a guide as to what this student is going to say later. In terms of the McCarthy era, I think that's fine to mention it in the introduction, but some teachers or examiners expect that if you're going to mention the McCarthy era in the introduction, then you're going to apply that context in the body paragraphs. So if I'm working with this student, I would just say be careful and make sure that you're ticking those boxes as you're going along. Let's have another look. Hitchcock ultimately insinuates that the price of voyeurism and its addicting nature to peep into the private lives of his neighbourhood while rejecting his own issues. Okay, yep. Although he was able to solve the sinister murder and seek justice for Anna Thorwald, not to Anna Thorwald, his guilty actions cannot be justified through rear window ethics. Okay, the audience was somewhat justified. Oh, okay, so the audience can't be justified. It has to be that Jeff justifies his actions. So remember, justified is to make just, so you really want to, make sure that you're using the word correctly there. By Jeff's inherent voyeuristic act, okay, but to a larger area discouraged by his peeping behaviour. Okay, I would say that in this particular introduction, possibly too many quotes. I'm not loving the prolific use of very short quotes in the introduction here, because it feels unnecessary in terms of why do I need a quote in the introduction when it's not really adding very much to what you're saying about the film. The other thing is that I understand that the last two sentences are an introduction to the body paragraphs, but it's not really telling me what the paragraphs are going to be about. So if we look at that penultimate sentence, the second last sentence, although he was able to solve the sinister murder and seek justice for Anna Thorwald, his guilty actions cannot be justified through rear window ethics. That's clear as a sentence, So grammatically speaking, there's not a lot that's wrong with it. But I think logically speaking, so the student is already saying that the voyeurism is bad, right? Hence the guilty label. And then the student says cannot be justified through rear window ethics. And what these ethics are is not clear as to what the student means. Now, of course, this is the introduction, so I'm not expecting an analysis here, but a different phrase and that gives me more of an idea about, you know, maybe something about the ends justifying the means, or maybe something about, you know, voyeurism is a common temptation that everyone partakes in, so it's not just Jeff who's, you know, guilty. And so, you know, if you have lots of people, you know, doing wrong, then is it really wrong? I don't know. But either way, I think the use of the quote here is not helpful, because it's not clarifying to me, the reader, exactly what the student is going to talk about. And that's what you really want to do in the introduction. And then in the last sentence of the introduction, the audience was somewhat justified by Jeff's inherent voyeuristic act, but to a larger area discouraged by his peeping behavior. Again, I'm not sure what the student is really saying here. So the student is saying, I think, that Jeff's voyeurism is somewhat justified in the film, but that there are other things that make us feel uncomfortable about his voyeurism. I think that's what the student is saying. And therein lies the problem. If I'm saying, I think the student is saying, you know, then you're not really saying what you mean. So if I were working with this student, I would say to them that I think you need to clarify the ideas from the outset of your body paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. I'm assuming this has 3 body paragraphs, we shall see. But furthermore, that there needs to be more of a connection, and I need between the body paragraphs, and I need to see the flow of logic that this student is going to take in the introduction. So that's the introduction. Let's have a look at the first body paragraph. So let's have a look at the topic sentence, right? Hitchcock alludes to the viewers that Jeffrey's inherent inquisitive nature could, to a certain extent, be vindicated as he found justice for Anna Thorwald. Okay, so it's pretty clear from the topic sentence that this student is, I assume, let's hope so, and that this student in this body paragraph is going to talk about how finding Anna's killer, or seeking justice for her and finding justice for her, justifies or vindicates his voyeurism. So let's keep reading, right? Although Jeffries was punished to pay the price, so there's a few typos happening here, which I'm hoping the student can pick up in SAC situations and in exam situations. Punished to pay the price to his voyeuristic tendencies, he was also rewarded as a journalist and neighbour to uncover and present justice to Mrs. Thorwald. Expression-wise, it's very awkward to uncover and present justice to Mrs. Thorwald. I mean, the woman's dead. It's not like you can present her with a trophy. So I think expression-wise, you know, we could clean this up. Hitchcock in the closing scene still did not highlight whether a murder has occurred or not. Oh, really? Did he not confess? Or am I remembering the film wrong? I'm pretty sure he confessed to the policeman, right? And this promotes neighbourhood love and compassion rather than voyeurism, which was the prompt that spread vastly during the post-war era. Okay, so the start of that sentence is somewhat unrelated to the idea that, you know, Jeffries was right to spy on his neighbours. Because this sentence is saying this promotes neighbourhood love and compassion. I mean, that's a tenuous argument at best, I think, because it's not like Jeffries had love and compassion for all of his neighbours before this happened. He was just bored, stuck in his apartment with nothing to do other than look out of his window and into the windows of his neighbours. The fact that he doesn't even know the names of his neighbours is, you know, a pretty strong opposition to this argument. So, but in saying that, I don't think it's a lost cause. I think you can certainly argue this position. It's just that this student hasn't done so just yet. So let's keep looking. Rather than voyeurism, which was the prompt that spread vastly. I'm not sure what the student is saying here. The prompt that spread vastly. So expression-wise, a little bit confusing here. During the post-war era, which I think is fine, that last bit is fine, but I'm not sure where the student is going with this. And this is a problem because we're almost halfway through the body paragraph and I'm still not really getting a sense of what this student is trying to say. Let's keep looking. Hitchcock, through the arrest of the antagonist Thorwald and bringing back a lively neighbourhood in the end, gives the movie a Hollywood happy ending to an extent. Sentence-wise, fantastic. Nothing really wrong with it, except for the Hollywood happy ending, a little bit colloquial for my tastes, but you know, I would check with your teacher. Thorwald symbolises the 1950s American society's biggest fear, which were communists, okay? It was widespread that people who were different were communists. Okie dokie. Without concrete evidence, Jeffries' unparalleled accusation of Thorwald was due to the reality that was established by Senator McCarthy. Okay? I'm getting a lot of sentences about the historical context of the film, and that worries me because there's no evidence to back this up. You know, it would have been much stronger. I'm not saying that there is a quote about this, but I'm saying it would be much stronger if Jeffries had talked about the communists, or if some of the other characters had talked about communism, or something that would shorten that logical leap between what we see on the film and what this student is saying about American attitudes towards communism and Senator McCarthy. So let's keep reading. Hitchcock depicts through the arrest of Thorwald the elimination of communism, very dubious here, but also toxic masculinity. Okay, again, I think both of these ideas are valid. They're just not being supported by anything in the body paragraph. He additionally sheds light to the power of accusation during the McCarthy era. Again, nothing to support this. It's all just, I think this, but nothing to prove that, you know, there is meat to this. Moreover, the eye-level camera angle between Jeffries and Thorwald at the final confrontation, okay, exemplifies the establishment that both men are equal, although one was immobile. Okay, yes, that's true. Jeffries' bravery to withstand a vigorous man as a wheelchair-bound person highlights his perseverance and journalist's tendency to be in dangerous situations as a solo man. Okay, this also indicates to the audience that although he is a voyeur who didn't respect privacy, he is also the protagonist, which contain a positive character to establish Thorwald as a murderer and shed light on the invalid life that Mrs. Thorwald that had to withstand being his wife through assault. I'm not sure what the student is saying here. It's very unclear as to what this has to do with Jeffrey's voyeurism being justified or vindicated. There's been a lot of ideas being thrown around here with communism and toxic masculinity and the two men being equal even though one is, physically stronger than the other. But I'm not really seeing any justification of Jeffrey's actions and whether or not that was morally or ethically okay. So this, it's very problematic. This gives some justification to Jeffrey's actions as he is seen to be doing the right thing as a neighbour rather than a voyeur. Okay, I'm not sure if the student has justified or proven this yet. And we're now at the linking sentence, right? But in conclusion, Hitchcock punishes Jeffries to an extent along with Thorwald. There's a few things here. This is the first body paragraph and already we're going for phrases like in conclusion. You don't really want to be saying in conclusion at the end of your first body paragraph, because if you're already concluding at the end of your first body paragraph, well, why do I need to read the second or the third or anything else that comes after it, right? So I usually tell students, try not to use these phrases at all, but if you do have to, try and keep them at the very end of your essay. And then we get a new idea here that Hitchcock punishes Jeffries, which I'm not sure we've really talked about in the body paragraph, to an extent along with Thorwald. And again, I'm not sure if we have talked about Thorwald being punished. We've talked about him being arrested, but that's a plot point, not an interpretation. Whereas if we're talking about punishing a character, it's, or if I'm reading this sentence correctly, that the director is punishing the character, that is an interpretation, and all interpretations must be supported by evidence. So overall, I think this introduction and body paragraph is a good start. I think it feels like this student has done a lot of reading about the film, they've done the study, and everything that they know about the text just being crammed into here. And what we have to remember is that an essay is not about how much you know, it's about how well you can answer the question. And the question here is Jeffrey's voyeurism morally okay? That's what the prompt is asking. So if the student goes ahead and talks about communism and toxic masculinity and characters being punished without referring back to that prompt or question, it doesn't matter how accurate your statements are. Your teacher can't give you marks for it if you don't answer the question. So what I would tell this student is that they need to go back to the planning stages of this essay and really make sure that their brainstorm or the planning of their body paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 really reflect the prompt, that they're talking about direct bits of the prompt. So either talking about voyeurism, Jeffrey's voyeurism, talking about the other character's voyeurism, talking about the other character's rebuke of these characters' voyeurism, and then something about the how finding justice for Anna Thorwald, whether that justifies or vindicates these actions or these tendencies to go invade other people's privacy. So that's what I would tell this student, and You know, to be honest, I say this to a lot of our students as well, that sometimes you do so much study on a text that you just get carried away and you're trying to cram everything, you know, into the essay. But we have to remember that an essay is a very specific form of writing. It's not a dossier of what you know. It is a very long answer to a very specific question. So I hope that was helpful. As always, like and subscribe to all of our social media channels so that you can get our latest tips and tricks to achieving your best in your English subject. And if you'd like to get some one-to-one tutoring, please contact us and we can send someone to you. Thanks for watching.